Mary redeemed a $50,000 cash prize playing Chumba Casino this year.
I was only playing for fun, so winning this was a dream come true.
Chumba Casino is America's #1 social casino experience. It's serious fun. With over 80 casino-style games to choose from, you too could win life-changing amounts of cash. Be like Mary. Log on to ChumbaCasino.com and give them a whirl. That's ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details. The voice in the preceding commercial was not the actual voice of a winner.
Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hello, everybody. I am so glad you're here with me today. I am the Proactive Caregiver, and I specialize in educating others on how to be proactive by empowering you, the caregiver. If you cannot take care of yourself, then you cannot take care of your loved one. And part of taking care of myself was learning about the stages of dementia. Dementia is such a broad term to explain well over 100 different ways our brain can deteriorate, causing the loss of basic functions. One of the first ways I began to understand this term and what was happening to Mom was to grasp these stages very well. A couple years ago, when I realized Mom was in late stage 5 out of 7 stages, I feared experiencing the inevitable. Would I be able to recognize the signs of dying? Would I be able to fulfill the wishes as described in her Advanced Directive, for example? That's why today's guest I've asked to help me talk through those questions, because I'm assuming other caregivers have them as well. Today's guest is Dr. Sammy Winemaker, and she's joining from Ontario, Canada, to help wrap our minds around what our loved ones may be experiencing during their final stage of life. Dr. Winemaker is a graduate of McMaster University Medical School, and she completed her residency in family medicine and fellowship training in palliative medicine. Her clinical work is predominantly community-based, caring for people in their homes. She is an associate clinical professor at McMaster University in the Department of Family Medicine in the Division of Palliative Care. Dr. Winemaker is an active educator and researcher passionate about examining the interface between primary care and palliative care. Most importantly, she is an advocate for palliative care reform. Her beliefs are strongly rooted in the idea that basic principles of palliative care should be the business of all healthcare providers and integrated into care seamlessly. Dr. Winemaker is also passionate about family getting their information, empowering them with health literacy. She is the founder and co-host of the podcast Waiting Room Revolution. Thanks for coming on with me today, Dr. Winemaker.
It is my pleasure, and thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it because as Mom progresses, these stages start coming to mind more and more, trying to figure out where she's at. But I start thinking about death and dying and the morbid thought, and it just makes me wonder, it is a very personal pursuit to understand this. So what made you decide in pursuing this in your area of medicine?
I feel like I should have a better answer than I do, but I'm going to be honest with you because I'm big on honesty. I took a rotation in palliative care to avoid doing another rotation in internal medicine. So and I guess it was just meant to be, because when I did a month in palliative care, followed by another month in geriatrics, and I think I did a month after that in psychiatry, some mentor told me that the reason that I was enjoying my training so much might be because there was this common thread that wove them all together, which was palliative care. And I just absolutely loved the person-centered, family-centered, interesting area of palliative care that is very much the art of medicine as much as it is the science of medicine. So it allows me to be a little bit artsy fartsy, I guess I would say.
That's awesome. And it makes sense because, and I think that's why I've even become more drawn to it, because it feels, when I approach the topics of hospice and what is done for patients, it makes me feel more comfortable about it. So I can imagine. So as this topic does become bigger in my mind, especially more recently with things happening with mom, mom does have a defibrillator. And so one of my concerns is maybe she'll have a heart attack and pass. And the suspecting the signs won't be an issue. But for others that don't have a heart attack or experience stroke, can you explain to our listeners what this death wind down process is?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, that's a really big and brave question. When I meet patients and families in their home, I never really know who wants to know that information and who doesn't. And so the first thing I usually do is I share with people that I do know about that process and that I can offer the information if people want to know. I may even go as far as explaining why it's important for many people to know and how knowing is like having a roadmap and makes people feel more grounded and
Yes.
less in the mystery of it all. And then they know what to expect, what's normal, what's not normal. But I really don't force people to know this. So it's important for your listeners to know, while I'm about to describe this, to ask themselves, are they the kind of people that want to know what the wind down process looks like?
Absolutely.
Most people, when they know, do feel better. And so I will say that to your listeners, don't press the stop yet, because you might be surprised by what I say is a lot better than what people anticipate dying looks like.
Good.
So if it's okay with you, Jessica, can I go ahead and describe
Absolutely.
that?
Please do. Please do.
Yeah. Well, no matter what type of progressive life-limiting illness a person has, whether that is a non-curable cancer or dementia or congestive heart failure or progressive lung diseases or kidney diseases, you name it, or ALS, even though each of these illnesses has unique features, our bodies know when they're in the advanced stage of an illness how to begin to wind down. And so we commonly find in the last year of someone's life, even if they're just frail elderly people, that we begin to see a decline. That if you step back and take a look from sort of above, you will notice that your loved one begins to slow down. They aren't up and about as much. They are more tired, and then they get more tired, and they just can't do as much as they used to do. They get weaker. They begin to lose their appetite typically and don't eat as much, and they take more naps, and then they spend more time at home instead of going out. Eventually, they begin to need more and more care. They just can't do what they used to do for themselves. And so people around them, their crew of family or caregivers, need to begin to get more involved in things like grocery shopping and all of those things. But then as time goes on, in their personal care, helping them with bathing and dressing. And eventually, no matter what illness, a person does end up being so weak and so tired that they spend a lot of time sleeping. They start needing help getting from the bed to the bathroom, and eventually they spend all of their time in bed. At that point, all their care happens in bed to keep them as well as possible. And generally speaking, that is the process of dying. Our bodies begin to just slow down. The loss of appetite is a signal, typically, if there's no other cause, that this is beginning to happen. And it is one way of our body preparing for the slowdown process.
That's very interesting because as I observe mom and sometimes I try and stay in the moment and enjoy that quality of life with her as much as possible. And then something will happen that she doesn't normally do, or she seems a little bit more fatigued and she is getting to be more tired. And I start thinking in my mind, oh no, because I am on the other side of it where I do want to know. And I do feel like I need to be prepared. It's in my personality, just try to be as prepared as possible for everything, because for me, it helps me to make the plans, get it all set up, and then sit back and relax and enjoy life as it is. But watching these signs and seeing her get slower and slower, it also makes this panic of, oh no, it's happening, it's happening. And then no matter how much I can prepare for it, it still gives me that feeling of anxiety of it's happening, oh no, in a different way. And so going from this slowness, and then all of a sudden she's not as slow. She has a burst of energy and a improvement of appetite, where sometimes the appetite is outrageous, but and then it's right back down again to this back slowing. So it's like noticing this ebb and flow and trying to, I know you can't predict when someone's last breath is going to be or when they are going to begin their slow down process. So in my mind, trying to help her, and of course, that's where I think many caregivers find their stress and frustration, is we're all trying to help our loved ones. And I'm thinking, oh, I need to just, maybe she's slower or she's more tired because maybe she needs more exercise in her diet or in her daily exercise. And that doesn't always seem to be the case.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I can appreciate that from the caregiver's perspective, that they're constantly scanning for signs, and looking for change and the meaning of the change, right?
Right.
So one thing to keep in mind is the wind down process that I described is a general process. And then we look at an individual illness category and layer that on top, because on top of that common decline, people who have dementia will have clear milestones or bus stops along the way that tell us whether or not a person is in the first, second, third advanced terminal chapters. So we would match the fatigue and the weakness with, are there other features that suggest that this person's in the advanced stage of dementia or heart failure or ALS or whatever the illness is, to help corroborate what we're seeing? From a caregiver's perspective, you might not have all of that intel. But what I wanted to say is that it's really important to look for trends and not change in the daily weather. It's more, what's the climate I see? So you'll have good days and bad days and good weeks and bad weeks. But really the wind down process I'm talking about is really stepping back and erasing, the good days and bad days, and just asking yourself, every month now, am I starting to see that mom is not as good as last month? Is that a trend now from month to month to month, even though she still has good weeks and bad weeks? But can I say every month she's running out of stamina, that it seems like she needs more help? And then that flows into week to week to week to week, then day to day to day. So what I'm saying is you can feel and see it coming. It's not just a one bad day or one bad week. It is a process of decline that goes through a phase. And you just have to really step back and look from a bird's eye view or 10,000 feet from above looking down, and not get too into the weeds of a good hour or bad hour. You look for trends, trending down, not just a moment of being down.
That's interesting. So I may be able to spend more time with her, or at the time that I do spend with her, be able to start doing this trending So if I'm able to indicate or feel that indication of maybe her wind down process is actually beginning, are they aware that they are in this wind down process?
It's a good question. With people with dementia, I'm not sure they would be aware of the wind down process, but for other patients, they might be. So, for example, I have many patients with end stage heart disease or lung disease or cancer who say to me, this doesn't surprise me, this conversation, because I can see, I mean, this is my body and I can tell I'm changing. Family members can also sometimes step back and say, yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me, Dr. Winemaker, that this is happening because we see it. We can see that something's happening.
Right.
And this is despite getting any, treatments or, and there's no infection like a urine infection or a change in medication or pneumonia. There's nothing that seems to be the cause of this change that is seen. And that's another sign that you can't put your finger on why the person is trending down. Well, that's because there's nothing reversible here.
Right.
And so, yeah, so some patients are really in tune with themselves and they can tell they're winding down. And in other conditions, they probably have too much going on with their brain to begin with, that they may be less aware. But we can't know for sure, right? I don't know. I can't answer that for sure.
It's and I've accepted that. I just learn day by day, be by her side, and just experience as much as I can with her. Good quality, bad quality, the good days, the bad days, all of that. It just, as I get closer, or I think I'm already starting to feel that trending that's happening. And it's that difference of accepting it and fighting, letting it go versus trying to stop it. Because like you said, that this is not something you can stop. It's just a matter of feeling comfortable with it and understanding it so that as it continues to happen, it's a process that we slow down with them as well. The grieving and all of that goes with it, we're kind of slowing as they're slowing.
Jessica, I think it's also important to say that the first thing you want to do when someone changes as a healthcare provider is be able to rule out that something else isn't fooling us. Of course, we wouldn't want to just say, oh, mom's entered into that chapter. If it's because she, has a urinary tract infection and she's looked so much worse because something else is causing it. So the first thing we do is make sure that there isn't something potentially reversible here, if that's the goal of care. But if we don't find anything and we can again match it with the known stages of a particular illness like dementia, then we could with pretty decent certainty say to someone like you, Jessica, as the caregiver, what you're seeing here is very normal. It's a very anticipated stage of dementia, and if you were part of my practice, I probably would invite you to know more about what does advanced dementia look like if you didn't know. And when mom is tired and not eating as much or needing more help with eating or not swallowing as well, what does that mean for mom? What does that mean for her timeline? And you don't have to know that information, but I feel as a doctor, I need to offer to invite you into those conversations, but I would respect if you wanted to know more or not.
Absolutely. I would definitely welcome that invitation because to me, the knowledge, it's not just power, it's also peace of mind. It gives that ability to relax and understand what's actually happening.
Yeah.
So
and make decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where the decision making process tends to be yet another stress trigger, because until we can figure out what's actually happening or confirm this is an actual wind down process, I've actually heard other caregivers stress about their loved ones not eating enough. And their concern is, we go through the try this, try that. Have you tried this yet? And a lot of like the Glucerna shakes or things that are like the protein shakes, because again, we're trying to help and it's really something that may not need the help. But Some caregivers even contemplate having their loved ones receive a feeding tube.
Yeah.
So I guess, I don't know if you can actually answer this question, but at what point would that be something that should be avoided?
Hmm. Are you asking specifically with patients facing dementia?
Dementia, I guess, is more specifically dementia related, because I'm sure someone who's not facing dementia and like cancer, for example, or
Yeah.
other congestive heart, they would still be able to say for themselves, yes, I want this, or maybe it's better or not. They would have a lot more of a input
Input.
to
Yeah.
provide.
Okay. Well, starting with people with dementia, a natural part of advanced dementia in the very advanced stage is that feeding becomes more complicated. At first, people take a very long time to finish meals.
Mhm.
And then eventually, they're unable to figure out, even if food is in front of them, how to get that into their mouth because of the changes going on in the brain, the higher level functioning, they call it.
Mhm.
So at some point, a caregiver begins to start feeding their loved one with dementia because a person with dementia just doesn't know how to get their hand to the food to the mouth.
Right.
And so if you have someone diligently helping to feed someone, they can go on for a while once the food gets in their mouth to be able to get the nutrition. But as dementia changes, even knowing how to get the food from your mouth to the back of your mouth and down, being able to chew and swallow,
Right.
becomes disconnected. And a person begins to resist being fed or spit out the food or pocket the food in the side of the mouth. And the problem is if we continue to try to feed someone orally like that, it can go in the wrong pipe and end up in the lungs, and a person can get a terrible pneumonia.
Right.
So many families say, well, what do we do? If my loved one can't eat anymore and they're losing weight,
Mhm.
I mean, I can't let them starve to death.
Right.
The truth is that those are all signs that the person's body is beginning to wind down, that their inability to swallow properly is a telltale sign that this has become terminal dementia. And they have done lots of studies into the feeding tube question as to whether or not putting a feeding tube in someone will help with their quality of life or help prolong their life. And the research is crystal clear for this patient population that it neither extends life nor does it cause quality of life. And so there's absolutely no role in end stage dementia for feeding tubes at all. It doesn't change the experience or the storyline in any way, shape, or form.
That's interesting.
In other patient scenarios, if there's a situation where, for example, someone has a head and neck cancer and something is locally causing them trouble to swallow, but they haven't started down that wind down process. It's just a blockage of some sort or a blockage somewhere else in the system. But their body has been still has some energy. They still have some life left in them. Sometimes a feeding tube can help give them the nutrition they need to live out the rest of their illness until they begin that wind down process. So sometimes we do use feeding tubes for certain situations, but once a person begins to die, once a person begins to decline from month to month to month and week to week to week, no nutrition in the world, whether it's by feeding tube or force feeding someone or doing it in their veins, there is no nutrition in the world that changes that process once it starts.
That's interesting. That's very interesting, because that at that point in time, if a caregiver is not prepared for that and watching their family member, that internal instinct to fight for life
Mhm.
is there.
It is a very heartfelt experience if you don't realize what the meaning of it is. And families stress so much about food and nutrition. It's a very common issue that comes up when I visit patients and families because, of course, that's the way we heal each other and ourselves when we're ill, when we're well, right?
Right.
Like if I get the flu, we have, chicken soup. And if we have surgery, we want to eat well to regain our nutrition and our stamina. It's the way our entire lives we have grown and stayed well, celebrated and shown our love to each other. So trying to explain how we're shifting lanes at the
Mhm.
end
Mhm.
is really really heartfelt for families, and that's really important for us to appreciate on the healthcare side of things. So we try to redirect caregivers and families to provide other comfort measures and other ways of loving someone, while at the same time we're trying to help them understand how normal this is and that their loved one is not starving to death. This
Right.
is a very different process than starving to death. This is normal.
And the idea, even as you say that, the idea of death and watching them go to it, I know it, the concept of it is very normal, but the feeling of it and witnessing of it doesn't feel normal. Um,
No, it
so,
doesn't.
and that's where I feel like there is a little bit of a gap, and which absolutely appreciate doctors like you, Sammy, because you're able to explain this and help family members, not just the patient, but the family members understand what's happening and what's normal, what's not, what to feel comfortable with, and when to act and when to just value those moments. But
Mhm.
the healthcare industry, that's one of the things you had mentioned, and becoming more of an advocate towards bridging that gap with healthcare and palliative care, because I see a huge difference between whenever I take mom to the doctor for an inpatient or an outpatient procedure versus speaking with hospice representatives that help get that idea, because those are conversations we have to start having. And I think sometimes the problem is sometimes caregivers expect a lot more from the healthcare industry than they're going to find. And the healthcare industry ends up being a little bit more limited. And it's limited being that they're there to do the jobs that they are hiring. Like you chose palliative care, but others may have chosen a different specialty for that reason. They're not understanding that connection of how to help others and help caregivers and help the family members that are in there to understand. So, if you had a magic wand to wave here, what would be one of the areas that you would love to be able to reform in healthcare?
Do you have an hour? But I know we don't. But okay. Well, Jessica, what I will tell you is that if I had a magic wand, I would make sure that in nursing school and in medical school
Mhm.
and all of our training, that we would make sure that every nurse and every doctor graduated knowing that providing a palliative approach is part of everyone's business. It is not reserved for palliative care specialists. This is everyone's business. Everyone's got a stake in it. Every
Yes.
cardiologist, respirologist, geriatrician, oncologist, everyone should be trained properly so that they can naturally provide a palliative approach when it's appropriate for their patients who are facing progressive illness, and not at the 11th hour,
Right.
that they integrate this into their skill set while they're caring for people right from the diagnosis. Because, for example, if someone is diagnosed with dementia, we know what the average life expectancy is. We know what the different stages are. We know that a palliative approach is appropriate, maybe in small proportion at the beginning and grows over time as time goes on. But you shouldn't have to transfer to another team to get that type of care. That
Yes.
type of care should be integrated into the care of the physician who's taking care of that person with dementia while they're still exploring disease modifying opportunities, that both of these things can exist and
Mhm.
coexist together. So this old fashioned idea of palliative care starts right at the end, and it's really only if you get a palliative care specialist, is so old fashioned.
Yes.
It's a philosophy of care, it's an approach to care, and it starts from the time of a diagnosis of a progressive life limiting illness. And it's woven in seamlessly so that the patients and families and caregivers never feel like there's been a transfer of care to palliative care. It is just integrated so seamlessly that it just feels for the patient and the caregiver like good care. That's all it is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that, because that is something that as a caregiver, I have taken mom to a handful of different specialists and feeling that disconnect from each one and trying to
Mhm.
figure out how to get them all on the same page, and for me to be on the same page to understand what everything is and not feel like I have had to become this medical detective. And only until recently, after doing this for a couple of years now, have I been able to finally connect mom's cardiologist, for example, with her gerontologist. And the services that are available are there for her, but the communication and the flow of all of it, it does give me that final feeling that, and the confusion and frustration in addition to
Yeah.
it, because then I'm talking to the cardiologist. They've explained this is the status, these are the needs, this is what you can expect, or they water it down for the sake of the
Yeah.
patient. You're fine, you're great, you're good, you've got several more years
Yeah.
to go. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I think I'm recognizing some of those trends that you were talking about, but that disconnect is there. And it's almost as if, well, I've done my part. I can just pass you
Mhm.
off to the next stage or the next specialist and let
Yeah.
them dig into the
Yeah.
details. And so then I feel, and I cannot imagine mom before she was even in these advanced stages being passed to the next specialist and the next specialist, aside of feeling that what's wrong with her, what's wrong with us,
Mhm.
what's wrong with this process. Oh, now we have to go somewhere else and hope that we get more answers. And a lot of times, instead of looking for answers, we're looking for the comfort, we're looking for the knowledge that says this is normal,
Mhm.
you're okay,
Mhm.
this is the process, this is what you can expect going forward.
Yeah.
And so now my detective work is, when do I contact hospice? When do I start getting that ball rolling? Because I have
Mhm.
no idea, or at least the little bit of idea that I'm starting to understand is not knowing. Actually, it is knowing. And that's probably my problem. It is knowing what it is and making the decision to, okay, now I'm in this next phase. Now we are going to start looking for palliative doctors as opposed to her gerontologist or her cardiologist. And
Mhm.
so I love that you put it that way, because going from one doctor's office to the next, I always walk out wondering, okay, there's one piece to the puzzle. There's another piece to the puzzle, and let's connect.
Yeah.
It's like playing the game of Operation
Yeah.
and trying to
Yeah.
connect it and not feeling that zap of frustration and
Mhm.
anxiety from not being able to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, that's very familiar to me because I meet so many caregivers who are frustrated by the same. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and a
Mhm.
family member has to become an Uber manager and coordinator, care navigator, and no one's really offering the meaning of it. Everyone's dealing with their piece of the person,
Right.
their heart, their lungs, their whatever, but no one's weaving it together. And so at the end of every appointment, you're left with no big picture of what does this mean. And
Right.
so what I suggest to caregivers is that you feel entitled and brave enough to ask every single doctor or team, what does this mean in the bigger context of my mom's illness? I know you're a cardiologist,
Hmm.
but you're also a doctor. And so, my mom has dementia or sub in any other illness. You just have to keep using the big picture of the illness as your anchor, and you bring it everywhere. So what does this mean in the context of the big picture of my mom's illness? What does this mean in terms of where she's at in her illness? And the other thing caregivers can do is declare themselves to the different medical teams like this. Hi, Dr. So-and-so. I'm Jessica. I'm so-and-so's daughter. I'd like to request that you speak openly and honestly and realistic with me, because that's very helpful for me. It's frustrating if I don't feel I understand the context of what we're talking about. So I give you permission, even though you might feel like it's going to make us sad or make us upset, or you'll disappoint us. We really want to know the real stuff here. And you have my permission to speak openly. Doctors and nurses shy away from open, honest discussion about things they can't fix or gray areas. We like to live in the weeds and the details, the things we can fix, and the black and white areas.
Right.
If patients and families and caregivers aren't asking, the clinicians will shy away from these areas that are fuzzy. They'll think, well, if the caregiver's not asking, then obviously they're fine and they get it. And then the caregivers, on the other hand, are saying, well, if the doctor's not telling me, I guess I don't need to know anything. And then we have like a cone of silence happening.
Exactly.
So I would say declare yourself, Jessica. You just come out and say, look, this is who we are. This is what degree of information we need. This is the type of information we need to make meaning here. And you have our permission. And I'd like to say, it's crazy that family or caregivers need to be the manager like you are, but it is the reality. And we just have to accept the fact that the healthcare system is a series of dots and someone has to connect them, and no one's going to show up. It has to be a family member or a patient themselves or a caregiver.
Absolutely. And that's unfortunately where we're at. And that's where I hear more and more caregivers that are frustrated. They are lost. That's what makes them feel so alone and hard to understand the details. And being able to say, just like it's hard to ask for help, but being able to give them, the doctors and the nurses, and give them the green light to say, I'm asking for the information. I'm welcoming it. Please provide it to me. It kind of gets them off of the hook, so to speak, because even if they're wanting and ready, I just feel like some of it's held back sometimes because on the flip side of it, they have to worry about, if I give this information and it might be inaccurate, partially, maybe not entirely, but partially inaccurate, then am I going to be held to the, or my word's going to be held to the fire and face litigation or something if things go differently later?
I think Canada is less litigious maybe than the US. I'm not quite sure. I don't think we worry as much about that piece of it, but I can understand why in the US, I think that's a big fear of healthcare providers. But I think it's the way you give the information that makes a difference. No one could ever say with certainty, okay, your mom has, exactly 3 months. But it is possible to say, with all things we're seeing, Jessica, and I'm just making this up, Jessica, but from everything you're telling me and from what I'm seeing and having cared for your mom, I wouldn't be surprised if she passed in the next year. But this is an art. It's not a science. And I could be wrong, but in case that's important to you, just in case. So again, who's going to sue someone for saying something like that?
Right.
So I think it's the way we offer honest, open, real information without pretending we know more than we do, and without withholding information that we know that we have. How can you get sued for just telling the truth in a way that doesn't promise anything, or make it so specific when it really can't be specific?
Because even the attempt for that information, you're comforting a family. And that
Yeah.
family may be able to go elsewhere and ask other questions, but it just seems like the education being able on both sides, because instead of it being for me, if I had that magic wand, it would be the level of education and compassion and the communication so that it flows both ways
Yeah.
between the
Yeah.
patient and the doctor and the caregivers, and just so that we're all
Yeah.
understanding and we're all here for each other, not
Yeah.
any one specific thing. Because that's kind of why I asked the, not specifically, but what led you to this area of medicine? Because some doctor may say, as it may be was their childhood dream growing up, and all they could think of was being this famous rich doctor. And so in the process of education and learning their craft, they might have lost a little bit of that compassion and what it means to be a human, and sharing that.
Yeah. Well, what I will tell you is that they have done studies on the amount of compassion med students retain as they go further and further in their training. And most unfortunately, some compassion is lost from year to year to year. Most doctors, I would hope, are going into this field because they really, really care and want to help people. But healthcare is such a broken system, and the things that drive care, like financial bottom lines and resources and politics and red tape and all of these things, it ends up unfortunately sucking some of the compassion out of doctors. And when they're spit out at the end of their training, often forget, what it was that brought them into the training. And I think that is also why so many students that I have come with me, residents, absolutely can't believe how wonderful palliative care is, because it reminds them of why they went into medicine to begin with. It is very human-centered type of medicine. It's real, authentic, caring medicine that looks at the whole person. And I think in palliative care, we, like no one else does, appreciate the family and the caregiver who are caring and shouldering all the care in between the hours that are many more than when the person's with healthcare. That families and caregivers are really our unsung heroes. When I see people say, oh yeah, nurses and doctors are the unsung heroes, I say to myself, yeah, maybe, but it's the family. It's the family that are the first responders. It's the caregivers that have to respond to the crisis at hand and have to do all the care. So we could not possibly do what we do without family and caregivers. And I think that if I had a second magic wand, I would say that we really do need to take a better look at how we incorporate families and caregivers into our care team so that they are woke, they are prepared, they are financially paid and supported to be in that role, and that they are respected. So yeah, I can't say that enough.
Yes. Thank you for saying that, because that I absolutely agree. I think the number of caregivers are growing for all sorts of reasons, and the number or the percentage of their stress is all growing for all of these reasons. So I think it's interesting and it's exciting to me that you started your podcast as well. Can you tell me a little bit about your podcast and how you're reaching others through it?
Yeah, I would love to. The podcast was born out of frustration of feeling like, we were trying, my co-host and I, his name is Cian, we were trying to change the system, improve healthcare, improve the illness experience for people facing progressive life-limiting illness. And it wasn't happening fast enough. We were trying to help from a systems perspective and help educate healthcare providers to change their old-fashioned ideas about the healthcare journey. And we were so frustrated, like a fly against a window, just didn't feel like it was moving fast enough. So we decided, okay, we're still going to help in those ways, but now we're going to pivot. We are actually going to bring this information to the consumer, the patients, the families, and the caregivers, and we're going to tell them all the secrets and all the inside scoop and behind the white curtain, the kind of stuff that they have to know and that they deserve to know from the time they're diagnosed, so that they can improve their illness journey without having to rely on waiting for a doctor or nurse to give them more information. So we arm the listeners with a new way of approaching the healthcare system, a new way of approaching their progressive illness, so that effectively they are sucking out a palliative approach without even knowing it from the healthcare system.
I love that.
It's amazing. It's called the Waiting Room Revolution. Season 1 is the heart of our movement to create a tidal wave of new patients, new family, new caregivers that come to the healthcare system activated, empowered, and force the system to change by being different type of consumer of healthcare.
Yes.
We've had really good feedback about it too. It's helped a lot of people. And I think for your audience, they might find it helpful as well.
Definitely. Because we get stronger together, and we learn. As we learn, we are stronger in this caregiver journey, the more information we can learn. So how do our listeners find your podcast? Where do you have it listed?
We have it listed on Apple and Spotify and all the usual places, but people can just go to our website. It's waitingroomrevolution.com.
Nice.
And they will find our website, and all of it's there, plus more stuff to sink into.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Sammy, for spending the time with me today on the signs of dying. I appreciate it, and I know other caregivers will appreciate it as well, and finding your podcast as well, because there's so many questions, and if we had even more time, we would definitely go deeper into some of these other topics. But thank you for giving me your time today.
It is my pleasure, Jessica. Thank you so much for the work that you do and for being an amazing caregiver for your mom.
I appreciate it. I will take that. Thank you. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining in today with us. You can find more about this topic on the blog at jessicalazelcannon.com. And I hope this gave you more food for thought. And until next time, be proactive. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalazelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.
Mary redeemed a $50,000 cash prize playing Chumba Casino this year.
I was only playing for fun, so winning this was a dream come true.
Chumba Casino is America's #1 social casino experience. It's serious fun. With over 80 casino-style games to choose from, you too could win life-changing amounts of cash. Be like Mary. Log on to ChumbaCasino.com and give them a whirl. That's ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
The voice in the preceding commercial was not the actual voice of a winner.